Is it one reform too many for Emmanuel Macron, France's president, braving the wrath of the street in what organizers promise is only day one of the biggest protest movement the country's seen in years, protests against his pension reform, a reform he put off during his first mandate because of COVID, but insisted he would submit again in his second term. He has. Why is Macron so hell-bent on a reform that's so unpopular that for the first time in more than a decade, trade unions are for once united? It's a test for them and for a president who went big on state subsidies to keep the economy going through the pandemic and the current energy crisis, but who won't take no for an answer on what he sees as the ticking time bomb of an aging population and a shrinking workforce to pay for existing pensions. France has a pay-as-you-go system. How best to pay for those pensions? We'll ask our panel how the current raising the current retirement age of 62 compares with neighbors. The government wants it, in most cases, to be 64. More broadly, what's fair in an age of accelerating inequality, a time of crisis, where the public more than ever needs a welfare state that, well, isn't what it used to be. Today in the France 24 debate, will pension reform prove Macron's make-or-break moment? And with us, commentator and communications consultant, Philippe Moreau-Chevrolet.
Hello, François.
Glad you made it.
Thank you.
Also,
glad to be there.
Also with us, former French member of the French Parliament, Jacques-Marie Le Sion.
Good evening.
Nice to see you. You're with Emmanuel Macron's Renaissance Party, yes. I should specify. Monica Kessler is director of the Social Policy Division at the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, François.
And he's usually in Los Angeles. François Girolf, assistant professor of economics at UCLA.
Hi.
Thanks for being with us.
You're welcome.
The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation you have on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. More marchers in the streets of France than in December of 2019. More than 1 million, say organizers. 2019 happens to be the last time Emmanuel Macron tried his hand at pension reform. They were still marching here in the capital after dark. That time it was COVID that forced him to retreat. This time, will it be the street? Nicholas Rushworth explains what's at stake.
Cette réforme n'a pas été menée dans la précipitation, mais dans la concertation.
Pension reform is a cornerstone of Emmanuel Macron's second term. Spearheaded by Prime Minister Elisabeth Borne, the government argues the retirement system as it is unsustainable. Money for it will simply run out. France's current retirement age is 62. That's one of the lowest in the European Union. The headline proposal is to gradually raise it to 64. That pushback will take place in periods of 3 months a year up to the year 2030. Another key change is that workers will have to pay into the system longer. Getting a full retirement will require 43 years of contributions by 2027. The current requirement is 42 years. There will be exceptions for those starting work early or who have physically demanding jobs. However, many people argue that the proposed reform is unfair. It's the straw that breaks the camel's back, hitting the poorest hardest. This hairdresser, for example, says he will have to work longer, even though he started when he was 18.
This is a heavy burden. Our job has its challenges. We stand up all day, we work with our arms, tasks are repetitive. I don't know many hairdressers who stay in the profession until retirement.
The proposed changes include ending the 40 or so specialized pension schemes for different trades or industries, streamlining the system, and the minimum pension will be raised to around 85% of minimum wage, or around 1,200 euros a month, for those who've paid their full contributions. That's not enough to convince French workers. More than 2 out of 3 of them are opposed to the reform.
More than 2 out of 3, and they were marching well after dark, Philippe Moreau-Chevrolet. Why is this coming to a head now?
Well, Macron decided to put it on the agenda, and it's his own decision. It's also his
personal decision.
Sure, and he was not forced into doing that. I mean, it was the only who could decide to put it forward. What he decided was to make it his big reform. He wants to have a legacy And the problem that Macron has, the main problem is that for the moment he doesn't have any strong reform that he would have passed in the previous mandate. He needs to have some kind of big gesture that he could.
Rail reform. There was.
Yeah, but he's not responsible for that. That's a European reform. There are small steps, but no big reform like Mitterrand, our former president, had, for instance. He doesn't have this big gesture. He needs to have one huge big reform. And the problem is about his method. His method is always to stating publicly that he will do something, and then you negotiate. You start by announcing in the press that you will reform the pension system, and then you have a debate with, you know.
So for you, the negotiation's not even begun yet.
No, we are not we are not negotiating. We are fighting. We went straight from the announcement of that reform to the fight. No kind of any talk in the between. Maybe a little bit in the parliament, but that's it.
Jacques-Marie Le Sien, the head of one of the more moderate of the center-left trade unions, the CFDT, he said there was no negotiation as such, that the government wasn't listening, and thus you have this rare moment of unity among normally splintered trade unions.
That's why I am a little bit. I try to find the right politically correct word. May I say ashamed or outrageously ashamed, because a lot of people are against. By prejudice, they are against. And even the unions are against. Even when you say they haven't negotiated. The government has been explaining, the government has been listening, and the government has been proposing. And the parliament will have to vote. And things have changed since the first plan announced in fall 22. A lot of improvements have been made, reducing the age of 65 to 64, taking into account the minimum pension level, rising it to 1,200 euros for retiree and for the upcoming retiree, and other measures like TUC, which is the people who were having, let's say, internship when they were young. These years were not counted in the contribution period. Now this will be done. The challenge is, as of today, the average age of retirement in France is 63.5. 63.5, while the legal retirement age is 62. Why? Because you have people who have started to work earlier, before 20, 16, 18, 20. They are already living before 62. You have the people who have 62, and the total amount of their contribution amount, which is something like 42 years today, and 43 very soon. These ones are living at 62. And you have plenty of people who are living after 64, or 65, 66, or 67, because they don't have enough years of contribution to obtain the full pension. So these people, nothing will change for them. And I don't understand why so many people are communicating about arguments that are, in fact, either lies or misinformations or fake news.
Or maybe they are just against it.
And they are just against it. Against Macron first.
No, against the reform.
Of course.
I mean, the government's own experts, but I'm speaking under your control. The government's own experts have stated that this reform was basically useless, that we didn't need any reform because
nobody
there was enough money to sustain the system.
No. Nobody has said. It's very simple.
Your own pension committee did state that in writing.
No, it's absolutely not true. It's absolutely not true.
Maybe I misread that.
Yes, absolutely. Because what did the Le Corps, which is the Special Commission for Observation of Retirement, they have made 8 scenarios, 8, to understand what is going to happen in the next 40 years. None of them is explaining that the situation is healthy. The result of the core studies is, yes, the situation will be damaged, and year after year, the deficit will be increased. And even when they are optimistic, they are basing the more optimistic scenario is based on an increase of productivity on 0.8% per year, which has never been done in France in the last 15 years. So they are optimistic, and even when they are optimistic, they are telling that we will have a problem. and we can understand why we have a problem. People are living, when the life expectancy at 60 in France is the highest of Europe. The highest of Europe for the men and for the women, first.
Yeah, life expectancy has grown since François Mitterrand in 1981 lowered that retirement age to 60. François Giraud, the argument we've heard over and over again the last 24 hours is this is a reform that forces those who earn less to work more than those who earn more. Is that true?
So the logic is that, so it's hard to say. So what's true is that people with more education will already have to contribute more to the system, because with the 43 age, if you start working at
43 years of working.
43 years of working. If you start working at 23, then at 66, you can take your retirement. So if you are with education, it's true. Now, if you started to work, of course, at age 18, it's more likely if you're low income that you start early, then you'll be forced by the age limit and not just by the contribution time.
Which is not 64.
Which is
not 64.
So
in the reform, if you start at 16,
okay,
you can live at 58.
At 16.
If you start at 58 in the reform, if you start to work at 18, you can live at 60.
So François Giraud.
So if you start a bit later, so 19 and 20, you have to start. You have to
live at 62.
To 64.
No, 62. 62. Read the papers.
Okay, so some people will be forced to work from 62 to 64, because otherwise you wouldn't put that age limit. So some people will be forced by the reform, not just by the contribution time, but by the age limit, to work 2 years more.
Otherwise, they would have said. Otherwise, they would have said work 43 years.
Exactly.
So they wouldn't have mentioned
as of today, you have almost 750,000 people retiring every year. Okay, out of them, 180,000 are already getting retired before the legal age, because they have started to work earlier.
Right.
So the problem is
but not with a full pension.
No, with a full pension. Sorry, with a full pension, the people who have long career.
So you're talking with long career, okay? But that's a restricted.
Those people who have hardship posts
are many people who are striking.
Those people who are hardship posts are, if we put them aside, then it's a different story.
Many people who are striking.
More moderate trade unions accuse the government of ignoring its own alternative to raising the retirement age, doing more to encourage bosses to hire older workers. Currently, only 35% of people aged 60 to 64 are still in full-time employment. In Politico columnist Paul Taylor writes the following: the MEDEF Employers Association is resisting a government proposal requiring big companies to publish data on older workers in a seniors index for fear of being forced to retain quotas of oldies. Oldies like myself, Monica Kesser. Would that have been, because there's a shortfall with the population aging. It's a pay-as-you-go system, so the fewer workers there are, the bigger the deficit for the pension system. Would that be the solution?
Absolutely. I think that is one of the most key issues in France, is to really get this emploi senior, so the labor force participation of older workers up. And you just mentioned it's about only 35% in the age group, 60 to 64, 20 percentage points lower than the EU average. So that's enormous. And that means that that here is really a lot of potential. And it also explains partly why there's so much resistance, because people do have a negative experience at the workplace of not being discriminated against, not being considered, not getting any training, because often you need training in order to stay longer in the workplace. You need adaptation of your workplaces. All of these things have to happen. If they're not, it's a negative aging experience, which is also causing a lot of fear and resentment, because you can't even envisage working that long if you don't have the right conditions.
And employers don't even want an audit of that.
Right. Right. I think audit maybe is not quite the same thing as the index, because the index is based on a very successful index in France, which is the gender equality index, which has been working really well and has brought the participation of women in senior positions in companies and so on up. So that is the kind of the example. The problem is a little bit that not all companies are equal in the employment of seniors. Because take some IT, very modern companies, which really need people who are fresh out of university, who have the skills, who have the kind of IT skills and technology skills, whereas others can employ older workers more easily because they don't have this kind of very fast turnover of skills. But I think those problems can be solved. And I personally find this idea of the index quite innovative. And I think that could be where France would be the first country to ever use something like that. So could be explored further and could be a very interesting model.
So that could be an interesting model. But what Paul Taylor argues is that, and this is, now we get back into politics here, Francois, is that the government is thinking twice before taking on the employers' confederation, the MEDEF.
Yes, I mean, they have to have someone on their side, right? Especially if they don't have the workers, it's very hard to push against everyone. Like, they have to listen to someone. So I think that's the first issue. But I completely agree. I mean, the problem is that we have a problem of people who cannot work for some reason. The question is this reform going to change anything on that? And is this addressing the core issue that you mentioned? Or is it a bit orthogonal, if you want, to the issue, or maybe even make the issue worse, that people will have to work longer, and if employers don't do anything about it, then that's going to be hard.
Monica Kessiak, would it be enough? Do you need to raise the retirement age if seniors worked more?
I think you still probably need to raise at least the earliest age. We keep talking about retirement age here, but we have to distinguish between the 62 and 67. There's 2 retirement ages in France, and 62 is the earliest where you can leave without a decrement. And that is quite low in international comparison, in EU and OECD comparison. So that age does set a signal also what is considered normal or not. And for all practical purposes, as was explained before, people who don't have the years, they have to work anyway until 67. So this is something that at the OECD, we try to explain to everybody that, wait a minute, it's not like everybody's gone by 62. The system is far more complex than that. But so I think that the earliest retirement age probably does need to increase in order to get the senior employment up also, because the two are working together. And you can see in OECD countries which did increase the retirement age, notably, for example, in the neighboring country, Germany, where it's already at 67, that the increase of older workers' employment rates have been absolutely spectacular. It's been going very fast up very quickly. And there's no reason to think that the French cannot work longer if other people can, because the life expectancy, including the life expectancy in good health, is longer.
Philippe Moreau-Chevrolet, of course, there's never good timing for pension reform. But now seems particularly bad coming out of COVID and in the midst of a cost of living crisis.
Yeah, but that's the only opportunity Macron had to pass such a reform. It was blocked before. It may be blocked afterwards because as the time passes, he will lose his political weight. He won't be able to perform that reform in like 2 years. It will be blocked also because he will be too weak. So that's the only window of opportunity that he has. That's a bad one, of course, because it's never a good time to do that. Also because the country is depressed after COVID, and there is a lot of resentment, maybe not as much as against Macron, that's against difficulties in general, because it has been piling up. Inflation, COVID, everything. And the feeling in the country, when you look at the studies that are being made on the feeling of the French people, they are feeling depressed. We thought that they would be more passive than that. So the fact that the demonstration is so huge is quite a surprise, frankly. We wouldn't have bet on that.
A good sign, you would say.
I don't know if it's a good sign. I don't know what a good sign is anymore, but it's a sign. Yeah.
You have to wait.
Yeah,
you cannot predict anything today.
Well, what our reporters covering it said is they were young people and old, and the numbers are clearly big. I mean, this is much bigger than...
Yeah, but the numbers are good, but not exceptional, and you have to look at that on a long-term basis if you compare it to what happened in the past. So this is the first day of strike. Let's see if we have other strikes next week.
But are you so convinced that this reform is a good reform? I mean, are you ready to die for that?
Of course.
You're ready to die?
One question.
Why?
Very simple.
I mean,
is there a problem? Is there a problem for our retreat?
For the opposition is stating that no, there is no emergency
the opposition
in doing that.
In this
That's
case,
the main problem.
Yeah, the opposition in this case is lying to people. They are lying.
Okay, everybody. I'm not in an Orwellian sketch. I mean,
yes, but how could you say?
I listen to both sides.
Yes.
I'm not thinking that anyone is lying.
Yeah, I think it's.
I am telling you.
I think the government has a conservative agenda, which is really conservative. That's why the conservatives are ready to
give
vote
you a good
for
example.
Reform, by the way.
To give you a good example.
Maybe the progressive are not
you have
anymore.
You have
maybe
the socialist leader.
Maybe that's a good thing, and you should accept that there is a political divide.
No. What's perhaps a bit of a contradiction on this is that according to the government's own figures, the deficit is projected to be not more than 1% of GDP. Like even in the worst,
which is huge.
Well, compared to the deficit that we have right now, it's really small, actually, to be honest. Because if you take a 0.5% of GDP, we have, I mean, every day, but like the government was spending.
It's not the question.
Well, people are thinking, look, you have money for this. Why don't you have money for the pension system?
What you have to understand, the retirement pension, the retirement system in France is based on an insurance system.
Yes.
It means, and most of the people who are on strike or demonstrating today are not aware of that. Mm. The active people are contributing to pay the pension of the retirees.
Yeah, the pay-as-you-go.
But a lot of retirees and a lot of people believe that they are saving money for their retirement, which is not true. I have been paying a lot of money to pay the retirement pensions of my mother or my grandfather, etc.
Why don't we ask the retirees, the current retirees, to give some money back? Why?
If you have we have a
there will be another option, right?
Which won't, but you won't agree with that. I have an answer that is politically too risky to do that.
Can we agree that in France there is an issue? First of all, the number of contributors was 4 contributors for one retiree 30 years ago. Now it's down to 1.7, and it's projected to be 1.5 in 2030. There is a problem, okay? More people retire and less people paying.
According to your own experts, that may not be a problem.
It is a problem.
Let's listen to the man himself.
It is a problem.
Let's listen to the man himself. Emmanuel Macron, and you heard Jacques-Marie Lossian saying this is the beginning. We'll see how this test of wills plays out. There have been previous cases. The most striking was, pardon the pun, 1995, when the country was brought to a standstill for a matter of weeks. Emmanuel Macron sticking to his schedule as if it's no big deal, jetting off to Barcelona, along with 11 of his ministers, for the long-planned signing of a friendship treaty with Spain that seals strategic ties in sectors like energy and defense. Of course, the French president was asked about the commotion on the other side of the Pyrenees Mountains.
All you have to do is look everywhere else in Europe to see that France is a little out of sync. And if we want to be fair to all generations and save our retirement system, we must carry out this reform. In countries that live longer and longer, where we've created fair and strong systems based on equality between generations, when you start to have fewer and fewer workers and more retirees, if you want the pact between generations to be fair, then you need to proceed with this reform. And so we do it with respect and dialogue, but also determination and responsibility.
François Girolf?
Yeah, I mean, the problem is, do we think that the system is broke if we don't do this reform? I think that's too strong, to be honest. It's true that the system is in deficit, that there is somewhat of a problem, that it's true that the baby boomers there's more people in the baby boom generation who are now getting older, and there's more of them, so you need to pay more pension. Now, the problem is that they did not save, if you have a generation that's greater, that's much bigger than the other, it needs to save when it's working, so that when it's retired, it takes the money out of the pot and it gets the pension. The problem is that they didn't do that. The question is, what do we do now?
They didn't do it over a number of years.
Exactly. They didn't do it, and they should have saved, in a sense, because we knew that the demographic problem was upcoming. If there's something that's really easy to predict, is that someone who's 20 at some point in 50 years will be 70. So it's very easy to predict demography, right? So there's no excuse really, and they didn't save.
The boomers once again.
Exactly, and the question is, should we pay for the boomers, or should they share in the losses where you should have a drop in the pension.
And you heard Philippe saying that
exactly.
that's not going to happen for political reasons.
Exactly, but that's something you can negotiate, right? I mean, you can. There are strikes. We can discuss this. You know, in France, we are reasonable, and maybe we can make a deal on. Okay, we do the pension reform, but in exchange, we do the pension reform perhaps
campaigns telling the retirees, say, give money for your children. I mean, they need to have retirements too. Maybe we could be generous for a while. I mean,
so maybe they want to give it to their own child rather than to the old system.
That, but
this is a great debate because this is the first time actually in a long time of listening to all of these debates around pensions here that somebody is worrying about intergenerational justice. What's really striking is that in France, compared to other countries, this intergenerational aspect is very rarely talked about. And even the young people who nowadays are against the reform, they say they don't want to work so long. Some of them haven't even started working, and they're saying, I don't want to work beyond 60 or 62. So they're not like people in other countries, young people are saying, how are we ever going to pay for all of this? Because our take-home pay is going down with every time that the contributions are being increased. So this is a debate that is largely missing here. And let me just say one more thing, perhaps, on the debate about the deficit. Many countries in the OECD don't have this notion of deficit because whatever it takes, you know, the government will fill up what's missing in contributions through taxes. What is a very important indicator for us is, economically speaking, is the part of GDP, of the national richness that is devoted to pensions.
Let's look at that. Let's look at that right now.
14%.
14%. It's the third highest after Greece and Italy.
Let's look at that. First of all, let's look at lots of reactions on the hashtag F24 debate. Jess writes in, French pensions are still much more generous than British pensions. I guess she is right. According to Almond Financial, French retirees get double the cost of living. In Britain, the number's closer to break even. Nearly 16% of the French state's budget goes to France's pay-as-you-go system. Currently, as you were saying, Monica, 12.6% in Germany. And it's interesting because that gap, if you look at this chart, is set to grow. What you see in light blue are the numbers for 2019, and then next to it, you have what's projected for the year 2050, and that is according to the current system. Sweden, there you see towards the bottom of the list. But it's not France nor Italy that are in EU's doghouse over pensions. Right now, are you listening, François Girolf? It's Belgium, where the benefits are bigger. The Commission threatening to withhold 847 million euros in pandemic recovery funds. Why are we not looking at Italy or Greece as why is it Belgium that's drawing the ire of the European Commission?
Well, I think that Italy and Greece have their own other problems, and that's actually, you know, do you want to make that number one on the agenda? I think that's what you were mentioning at the beginning, at the outset. That's a political choice, you know, to decide that that budget is going to have to be in equilibrium, and the rest, we just don't care. It's really weird, right? Because we have like some kind of a double standard, if you want, where this has to have a 0% deficit, and the rest you can have a minus 5% deficit. To be honest, it's very hard to explain to people, and it's very hard to understand. And I completely agree. So numbers say that the pension system is very generous with the pensioners. One option to decrease that number would not to be to postpone the retirement age, but instead to reduce the pension. That's another option that the political that could be a political choice as well. As you said, it's very hard for Macron because now his political base is more
on this very set, and I'll put it to you, Monica Kissel. Just on this very set, 24 hours ago, we were speaking about Davos and that inequality report put out by Oxfam. And one of the panelists was saying the French pension system, if you want to fund it, it's not by saying who gives money back. It's by taxing corporations properly. It's by taxing the rich properly. Is that something that your department has looked at, whether taxation is also to be put in this game?
Taxation is absolutely essential, but that's independent of pension systems. Because the inequality issue is so much bigger than just the inequality between retirees or, say, some workers, older workers, younger workers. the inequality issue is something that has been increasing over time, and the OECD has been doing a lot of work on this. And there's many things that have to be done. They start in the labor markets because inequalities accumulate over lifetimes. And so we start with education, we start with labor markets between low-income people, high-income people. Health is affected also by inequality.
In all countries.
And in all countries. And of course, you have to think about how to tax people, how to tax companies. Different countries have different solutions to this. We have, for example, the Nordic countries, which have always been high-tax countries based on a social consensus. Then we have countries like the US, where that just doesn't fly. So I think, and France is one of the more higher tax countries, obviously, and the tax wedge is already very high. So you have to think very carefully about who you're going to tax. And remember, this was tried here in this country also under Hollande, and the problem was that a lot of the millionaires, which were supposed to be taxed, just took their things and went over the borders.
Went to Belgium.
Went to Belgium, for example. So it's not an easy thing to do, but taxation is definitely part of the equation. And the OECD is also working on this, as you may know, for example, to have a global tax to make sure that all companies pay.
But many people who are marching in the streets of Paris today see this pension reform as part of that so-called race to the bottom, where it's the lower class people who are going to be the losers of this reform.
Which is not true.
This is not. It's not going to be necessarily the lower class people. It's going to be certain people who don't have the full careers and have to work longer. But if you, it's difficult.
So if you're saying don't have the full careers, you're saying women, because they're the ones who take time out to have children.
Exactly. Women have.
No,
but part of the time that they're taking out to take care of children will be compensated, and
it's compensated.
And they're already compensated for the simple fact of having a child is already being compensated. But the problem of women's low pensions goes much beyond just children and time out. It's the accumulation, again, of a lifetime of disadvantage in the labor market, of lower wages than men, of worse work conditions, women also not choosing lucrative jobs. And you will find no pension system in the world, not a single one, that can make up for all of those inequalities. If you want the extreme redistributive pension systems, very simple. You go to New Zealand and you pay everybody the same amount. That means that low-income people get, relatively to their income, a very high pension, and the people who make a lot of money, they get practically nothing out of the system. That is the kind of most redistributive solution. Is France ready to go that way? I don't think so, and I don't even think it should be doing that. But so I think when you think about redistribution, you really have to think carefully, what are the mechanics of the system, and what would be a solution for this? And is that fair? Does every woman deserve a higher pension just because she's a woman? Or are you going to look at every single case?
Jacques-Marie Le Sien, it's a difficult pivot for the French president, because we're coming out of the COVID pandemic, where the decision was made to spend. It was called the whatever it costs, I think was the expression that was coined in this country. So we're coming out of the whatever it costs, and here suddenly we're told to be fiscally frugal once again. It's a difficult sell.
Yeah, I think President Macron tried to explain that at one moment, and he said, let's say it's the end of the golden age, right? Times are difficult. And I understand that some people are not pleased to see that they will have to work 1 or 2 more years. Let's be realistic. What you said just before, it's not good for the poorest. It's not just. It's not correct. It's not correct. Look at the pensions in France. The people who are under the poverty index, which is 60% of the average revenue. France has the lowest ratio of poor people among the retirees, 8%. 8% only of the retirees are under the 60%.
Which means that perhaps the pensions are too high.
Yes.
No, so you agree we should reduce the pensions?
Too high compared to other people in Europe. And the problem comes from that. Our pensions are high, first. We are living longer, and we have less and less contributors compared to the number of retirees. And remember what I said at the beginning. Today, the average age of retirement in France, average, is 60.5. So asking people to go to 64 is not a scandal. And I said, people are living earlier than 62 today because they have started earlier, before 20. And as you said, madam, a lot of people are, if they need a full pension, they need to work until 65, 66, and up to 67. Up to 67. So, this limit will not be changed. This limit will not be changed. And my children will probably start to work at 23. They will have to wait to 66 for 43 years. And in fact, only 10 generations of people are impacted by this reform. The people who have started to work who are born in 62 until 72. You have only 10 classes of age of people who are really impacted by this reform. Only 10 years.
Another way to see this is it's very unfair because you put the costs on these generations, and why them? You know, they can say
the ones who are starting to work today or 10 years ago will not be impacted by the reform. Yeah. And last point, the people who are getting retired today or some years ago, remember, when I was demonstrating when President Mitterrand was elected. At the time he was elected, the retirement age was 65. 65. And the life expectancy at this age, when you were retired, was 7 years. 7 years. Okay? So you were for men an average. Now, when President Mitterrand said, let's make it 60, it jumped from 7 to 12. And nowadays, it's for the men 22 years, for the women 27 years. 27 years for women today, retirement.
I think what makes perhaps the reform very hard to explain for Emmanuel Macron is that he used to say that the retirement age was a very unfair way to do a retirement reform. And he's changed his mind on that, apparently. And that's very hard to explain. Why don't you just put a retirement duration? Why don't you say, just push it to 43? Much faster, which is part of the reform, and why switch the retirement age from 62 to 64? The option would just be to remove that and just keep the acceleration towards 43.
And we see on this a disconnect between the perception of France's president abroad, where he is seen as a liberal reformer who, like when he ran first for president in 2017, wants to take the best ideas from the left and the best ideas from the right.
Yes.
And the way he's perceived domestically, he can pass this reform, Philippe Moreau-Chevrolet, even though the unions are against it, even though public opinion is against it, because he's got a coalition now to his right with the conservatives.
What we see is that increasingly, the president himself, Emmanuel Macron himself, during the legislative campaign, has decided to choose his own, to pick his own enemy, and the enemy was the left and what we call NUPES. Okay, it's the
Leftwing Coalition.
Yeah, Leftwing Coalition. He's been against the Leftwing Coalition straight from that point. So, of course, nowadays there is a conservative bloc around him in the parliament. Also because he has lost his majority in the parliament, he needs to have the reinforcement of the rights and of the conservatives. So this is clearly a measure, his strongest reform, if it were to be passed, would be on the conservative side. And it wouldn't be a surprise for us as French because we saw that coming. But it may be a surprise for the outside observers because they didn't perceive Macron as such. But what we saw is an evolution of Macron from, taking the left on his side in order to get elected in 2017 and push this electorate who was on the left to the right side with him. Or maybe this electorate pushed Macron, we don't know. But nowadays, we have a conservative bloc, which is quite strong, because what we saw also was negotiations between Macron and including the far right in the parliament, to have some jobs. You voted for the far right to have some jobs in the parliament, some responsibilities for the first time in the Fifth Republic.
Excuse me.
That's a fact. I'm not judging.
Excuse me. It's not Macron.
I'm not judging.
No. I'm just telling you, it's not Macron who was voted for these MPs.
Yeah.
It's the French people. Okay. So if
sure,
you have,
but I'm not saying that Macron is not legit. Macron is legit.
No. I'm telling you that
I'm only saying that he's doing that.
No. He's doing nothing.
He's free to do what he wants.
In the parliament, he's doing nothing. the parliament is free of doing whatever he wants. Okay, and if in the parliament,
I would like to share that perception. I would love to share that perception. The parliament would be free from any outside influence from the executive branch.
If in the parliament you have MPs who have been elected by the people,
come on, that's
and if
you have a right to be conservative. If you are conservative, just say it.
I'm not conservative. I'm not conservative. You are telling me that I'm not.
Jacques-Marie Le Sion, another
That's
source.
the main problem.
Another source of fury for trade unions is the recent reform of unemployment benefits. The government fast-tracking through Parliament in late last year a 25% cut in the 2 years in which the jobless currently can collect benefits. In France, you get fired, you lose your job. For 2 years, you can collect benefits. 3 if you're over 55 years old. And then, just 3 days before Christmas, emerged reports of a plan for a decree to make it a 40% cut in the times that the French can stay on the dole. There's two problems. Obviously, on the left, they're saying this is a further unwinding of the welfare state, and also the method by stealth. That this is happening. This tightening of the rules when it comes to welfare benefits.
And it was announced on Christmas Day, of all days.
December 23rd.
Yeah, 23rd.
First of all, it was if the unemployment rate goes below 6%. In the project of the decree.
But Macron, the campaign trail, promised that he would be more consulting, that there would be more compromise. This seems to be happening by stealth.
First of all, the project was saying, can we have 30% decrease if the employment rate goes below 6%? Okay, first. The unions and a lot of people say it's not fair, it's not correct, and this measure was cancelled, right? Right or wrong?
Yes, it was
cancelled.
It was cancelled. It was cancelled.
Okay.
Yeah. Because there was much anger. So
when you say previously that the number of people over 60 in France, the employment rate is low compared to other people in Europe, I have a very good explanation. It's the limit of the retirement age when it was pushed, and it was a good measure at the time it was done in 1881 with Mitterrand to move the age to 60, from 65 to 60. But the consequence of that, it created a sort of appeal for the enterprises to get rid of the people before 55. And I know that because I've conducted plans, retirement plans, pre-retirement plans for my people in my company. All
right, so there need to be plans. We're running short on time. There need to be plans for seniors, to those who are older in the workforce, to be able to be hired and to be hireable.
The challenge.
Monica Kessel, we talk about this this bid to shorten the amount of time you can receive unemployment benefits. In Emmanuel Macron's first mandate, foreign direct investment to France rose. It was an attractive place to do business. Part of that attraction is the fact that there are good public services, that there's a good welfare state. Do you worry with this pension plan, pension reform plan, that France, again, the loosening, there is an erosion of that welfare state, of the basic services that the state provides?
We're going to have new numbers out very soon at the OECD, which will again show that France is consistently the country of all of the OECD countries that spends the most on social policies.
In the world.
So social spending is 30% of GDP, and it's the highest.
Is that good or bad?
It is. I think that's a political decision. I think
it's good.
You can be of the opinion that this is a good thing because you have great crèche, you have école maternelle, you have great family policy, you have good pensions, you have good health care. So all of these things, if the population wants to spend on that, that's good. But at the same time, you do have to take into account what is the non-wage labor cost. And so what the difference between take-home pay and the gross salary that the employer has to pay. And that's an important indicator in many countries because for two reasons. One is the competitiveness if you have high non-wage labor costs. And the other is that the more you saddle on to the wage in terms of contributions and taxes to be paid, the less the person gets to take home and pay and spend. And that now in a time of rising inflation and difficulties for people that they don't have enough disposable income to make ends meet is a concern.
Very last point, very briefly, François Giraud.
So I think this would not be an issue if the young were sure that they would have a pension. The problem today is that they feel they're contributing into the system, but they are not sure that the pension system will be the same that it was. So it will be as generous. And so they see the difference between the gross and the net, and they're not sure that they're contributing into a system that's working. And I think that by saying that the pension system is broke, perhaps doesn't change that perception. So we need to be careful about that, I think.
All right, it's day one of those strikes. The standoff perhaps only beginning. François Giraud, I want to thank you. I want to thank Jacques-Marie Lossian, Monica Kesser, Philippe Moreau-Chevrolet. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 today.